love you, you love me. Show me your love, oh darling. I love you, you love me. Show me your love, oh darling. Life or death, kiss me and smile, oh darling. Nana Juma, fire play. Legon bravo. Ashikele. 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 Thank you. We call this one Legon Abrabo. As much as the chorus is very simple, Legon Abrabo is not simple at all. Economics and it is a crime, Bravo. Legon Abrabo, economics in So we would like you to join in, Prof. Legon Abrabo, economics in Legon Abrabo, economics in low.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are starting this evening's program. Shall we please be on our feet whilst the speaker and the chair take the high table? I humbly ask that we put our mobile phones on silent. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening once again. President of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, past presidents of the Academy, vice presidents, fellows, invited guests, students, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the President and Fellows of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, I warmly welcome you all to this evening's event. It is a tradition in the Academy and in most institutions of higher learning to give newly elected members an opportunity to deliver inaugural lectures in their areas of expertise to their colleagues and the general public. This evening, we are privileged to have a scholar speak to us on a very topical subject. The inaugural lecture used to be an in-house program of the Academy, but because of its usefulness to our friends in academia and indeed the general public, it was made a public lecture in 1998 and has remained so since then. Let me introduce to you the chairman for this evening, who will take over from me and introduce the speaker. Our chairman is Professor Joseph R.A. Ayi. He is the Vice President of the Arts Section of this Academy and Professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Ghana. Elected a Fellow of the Academy in 2005, he served as Assistant Honorary Secretary from 2014 to 2016 and as Honorary Treasurer from 2016 to 2017. He was the occupant of the UNESCO United Nations University Leadership Academy, Chair in Leadership Studies at the University of Jordan in 2001, and the Emeka Anyaoku Visiting Chair of Commonwealth Studies at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, University of London. He was also the Rector of Mount Crest University College from 2013 to 2014, Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa from 2010 to 2012, Dean of the Faculty of Social Studies, University of Ghana from 2002 to 2009, and Head of the Department of Political Science at the University of Ghana. Professor Ayi served as a member of a team of experts that drafted Ghana's National Decentralization Policy Framework and Action Plan 2015 to 2019, and the National Decentralization Policy and Strategy 2020 to 2024. He has over 200 publications in several areas of political science, public policy, and administration. His current research interests include think tanks, higher education management, public sector reform in Africa, as well as political institutions and public sector management in Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome the chairman with a round of applause. Thank you.
President of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, Vice President, past President and Vice Presidents, fellows of the Academy, students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and a happy African Union Day to all of you. And is it not a good coincidence that whilst we are celebrating African Union Day, there is also an inaugural lecture on African music studies, the contribution of African music studies to universities. I would like to introduce our speaker. Our speaker is Professor John Collings. He has been active in the Ghanaian West African music scene since 1969 as a guitarist, band leader, music union activist, journalist, writer, scholar, and archivist. He obtained his BA degree in sociology and archaeology from the University of Ghana in 1972, and his PhD in ethnomusicology from the State University of New York, Buffalo, in 1994. Professor Collins has given many radio and television broadcasts, including 40 for the BBC, and has been a consultant for numerous films on African music. In the 1980s, he operated his Boko recording studio at South Ofanko. During the 1990s, he was technical director of the University of Ghana, a University of Mainz Music Digital Redocumentation Project, and for 7 years was a trustee of the Ghana National Folklore Board. Professor Collins began teaching in the Department of Music of the University of Ghana in 1995. He was promoted to the grade of professor in 2002. Between 2003 to 2005, he served as the head of department. He also co-ran the university-based local dimension band, and in the early 2000s worked as a consultant for the World Bank programs assisting African music industry. He naturalized as a Ghanaian in 2008. He is currently on post-retirement contract with the University of Ghana. He is a patron of the Ghana Musicians Union, Musiga, and chairman of the BAFMAP African Popular Music Archives. He was elected fellow of this academy in 2020. Professor Collins has around 100 publications as articles and books on African music, and is a member of the Ghana Association of Writers. He is currently teaching a New York University in Ghana course on contemporary African music. He is also on the High Life Music Committee of the National Folklore Board that is working on listing High Life as a UNESCO World Intangible Cultural Heritage. Audience, this is your speaker. But before he comes, somebody is going to give us a spot of music.
Me here will be a overchaming yase. The actual prof. What's in the legend. Think tank. Mobile museum. Mamina nyamia siansa o. Memaye idea ya tietie bi asamo abedenam. Ba na ma welcome prof to the podium. Medin kan do asamo mo. Medin kan do asamo mo. Ba ma bay more money, yo. No, there was. Nan can send be a year or young. How life you cry, you never be a free a buyer. And so watch them. I'm young. That will be an invitation. I got Princeton University, so I'm a workshop. Not a prof, and I'm on church. Obebo in Chima Kohoma. I don't need blood row. So, Bana Becassa. Ani mwani mama katachia manyua ya mami ni aya obodom akohoma sadi ayira wonwumu bia wadana dia me ehunu enti abra no so Professor Collings a plan one draw. Oh, Papa, oh, am I Ghana? What the witcher be mine? That man, now, man, son, you know. I could go for a chromashan and so. One more summer drama and singing. More, Bama Bay. More money, oh. Mo Bama Bay, Bama money, oh.
Thank you very much, Osei Koranchi, who I've known for many, many years. He's the guy who almost single-handedly saved the Seprawa from extinction in Ghana through Konimo and Professor Nketia. And now we have so many people playing the Seprawa. It almost died out. There were just a handful, and luckily his grandfather taught him as a child. Also, the band that was playing when you came in is led by Dr. Eric Sunu, who's sitting at the back. He's going to control all the pictures and the music. And he's the leader of the music department, the University of Ghana Music Department Palm Wine Group. So they were playing a little earlier. Okay, so let me start the talk. As you can see from the brochure, it's the contribution of African popular music studies to universities. This is actually based on a talk I gave, was it about 20 years ago when I became a full professor. But that one was a dry lecture. No pictures, no music. It was at the registry at the top of the hill, you know. But this one, I'm going to use lots of music and many photographs. So let me start reading and we'll go through this. And then, Eric, you'll be ready with the photographs, the slides. Okay, ladies and gentlemen and Academy Fellows. I've sometimes been asked, why is it necessary to study African popular music in Ghanaian colleges and universities? As academics often think this type of music is too frivolous, too trivial, and too lowbrow to be taken seriously. However, the first generation of great African leaders, such as Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Secretary of Guinea, Modibo Keita of Mali, and Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, all fully recognize the important role that popular music and mass entertainment played in the independence struggle. For instance, in Ghana during the 1950s, high-life composers such as Ike Nyami, Kwame Nkrumah, E.T. Mensah, and Jerry Hansen wrote numerous pro-Nkrumah songs. So not only did Nkrumah and other first-generation African leaders foster traditional African performance, but they also established state popular bands and trade unions, and the trade unions, national competitions, and recording studios needed to sustain them. So if we could have the first picture. Now this is Kwame Nkrumah. He was actually the nephew of Kwame Asari, who made the first recordings of Jan Ponsa in 1928. I never met his uncle, unfortunately, but I did meet Kwao, who gave me a lot of information about early, what we now call palm wine music. He's also the person who introduced the high-life guitar into Cape Coast University, just as Konimo introduced it to Kumasi technology. This would be way back in the late 80s and 90s. And then myself introduced high-life guitar into the music department at Legon. And in fact, he was my teacher, or one of my principal teachers, and a very good personal friend. Now, we'll play a little snippet of a song that he wrote to welcome Nkrumah out of prison. I think it was in 1951. The British tried to lock him up, so he'd lose the elections, and he forgot that human beings are very strange creatures. If you tell them not to do something, they'll do it more. Contrariness is part of the human nature. So by locking him up, they more or less guaranteed success. So I think he became prime minister or head of government in 1952. So this is a song by Kwame Nkrumah welcoming him out of prison. Okay, the song, Eric. Number one. Okay, if it's not going to come out, I'll just go. Is there a problem with the songs? Yeah. I can't hear you from here. We didn't do a proper sound check, sorry. I got so busy talking to people. Yes, okay, we'll go ahead. Yes. Despite the contribution of African popular music to the 1950s and 60s independence movement, its acceptance as an academic area of study took much longer. This presentation therefore begins with the difficulties in getting this topic into the curriculum of African university departments by focusing on the case of Ghana. Kwame, as I mentioned, Kwame Nkrumah fully endorsed the popular performance sector, as well as traditional music and African art music, as part of his three-pronged national culture plan. However, his overthrow in 1966 prevented his well-rounded tripartite approach being fully transmitted into the university syllabus. As although courses on African traditional and African art music were introduced around 1960, this did classes on African popular music, including even Ghana's homegrown highlife. Indeed, the first African popular music courses in Ghana were only introduced to university music department students in the late 1990s. That's a gap of almost 30 years. Beginning first at Legon by myself and Professor Willie Anku, and at the time when Professor Kofi Anyidaho was director of the School of Performing Arts. It was then I began teaching African popular music classes and high-life guitar, and Professor Anku introduced courses on recording and digital technology. At the same time, both of us were involved in inquiring the dance band equipment for the department's first pop and high-life band. In fact, the veteran high-life musicians, T.O. Jazz and Ibo Taylor, were brought in to help to run this student band. Next, picture 2, please. Okay, this is when I was head of the department. Willie Anku is on the left, and in the middle is a musician from America called Juma Santos, or Jim Riley, who I brought in for a year teaching jazz studies in the music department. He was the person who plays percussion for Miles Davis on Bitches Brew, and quite a famous American jazz musician. The benefits of these new courses, these are the ones that myself and Willie were getting into the department in the late 90s, are as follows. Training students to play high life, of course, supplying pedagogic teaching materials from the scores of local popular music, because there had been no score books of high life. Even today, we really don't have very many. Providing knowledge and skills that help students find jobs in the popular entertainment and tourism sector and the creative arts industries. It was a course that attracts many foreign students, and a music department pop band is able to show high life and other forms of African dance music at home and abroad. One other reason I could add to this above list is that these new university popular music courses continued the pioneering work on high life done in the late 50s to mid-60s by the University of Ghana's African Music Society. This involved Professors Kwabena Nketia and Atta Anan Mensah, as well as, and later Ephraim Amu also came in when he came into, I think he was in Kumasi, Winneba, and then came into Legon. And they were all interested in high life, as well as African traditional music and African art music. The society, that is the African Music Society, was established in 1958, in fact, and included my own father, Edmund Collins of the philosophy department, who was a guitarist, and Robert Sprigg of the history department, who was a pianist and published a seminal article on high life called High Life Notations in 1961. Next picture, please. Picture 3. Okay. you can see my dad is up on the left, and Yamwa is on the right, holding a guitar, of course. By the way, my father, it was Patrick Yamwa who gave me the photograph. When I was first traveling with concert parties, my father never told me that he traveled with concert parties. He didn't travel as a musician. He supplied electricity from his car for battery power, because, you know, in villages there was no electricity. And the lady in the middle later became my stepmother, my Auntie Amma. So it's a very interesting picture. The other way, I think, there was a picture, I think this picture was taken in Adwajiri or in Suwam, so 1958. And my father never told me. Up until the mid-60s, the African Music Society organized extracurricular evenings at Achimota College for guitar bands like Onyinas, Ike Nyamis, Yamwas, like Patrick Yamwas, and Ajikum's band, which attracted students. And here's some surprises, such as the renowned, or would-be renowned in the future, philosopher, Professor Kwesi Wiredu, who was an adept high-life guitarist. I bet most of you didn't know that. I actually sat down when I was young in my dad's house, played guitar with Wiredu, you know, who was then a renowned philosophy professor, but he was a student. He came into this through this African society, music society, which, by the way, the university has totally forgotten about. There's no institutional memory of this. I was able to get some of this information, obviously from my dad, but he passed away. Also Professor Nketia and a few other people, because there was this belief that Legon never touched high life and popular music until myself and Willie Anku came along. It wasn't so. They had, but there'd been a sort of a discontinuity, if I can put it that way. Another was Kojo Donko, who, despite becoming a career diplomat, was also a high-life composer and record producer. So these were some of the students that hung around with this African music club. However, at this point, I will turn to the ways African popular music studies are not only relevant to African performing arts departments, but also to 5 non-performance university departments that handle a diverse range of subjects, namely sociology, political science, Prof, your department, African studies, we've got some African studies people as well, hello, and gender studies, and history, which we'll start with, history department. So I'm now talking about the importance of African popular music studies for departments outside of the School of Performing Arts, other departments. As compared to the serious and immortal classical music of the elites, popular dance music is treated as merely entertaining and ephemeral. However, its very informal and fleeting nature plays a positive role in terms of historical information, in that the lyrics of popular songs captured in early recordings can mirror past current events and project the immediate concerns of their composers. As commercial popular music recordings go back to the late 19th century, old records can therefore be a valuable source of information for students and staff of history departments anywhere in the world. Indeed, this information that comes from the street provides a history of the inarticulate that counts. I think this is actually a type of historical analysis that's been given a name in England, the history of the inarticulate, that counters orthodox histories that are usually written by and from the point of view of powerful and educated elites. In short, pop songs of the past provide us today with a voice of the common people who do not usually write down their own histories. In Africa, the very first local popular music records were pressed in the 1920s, and so they too can be tapped as a source of information by Africanist historians who want to find out what the non-literate colonial masses were thinking in the past. Although these subalterns may not have written down their views and concerns on paper, they nevertheless did express them through popular songs. The reason that African popular artists are able to supply historical information from the bottom up comes from their low status in society, as they are largely drawn from the intermediate classes that are located economically in between the national elites on the one hand and the traditional subsistence farmers on the other. In the past, most pioneering Ghanaian highlife performers came from this intermediate background. For instance, the members of the Jaguar Jokers highlife bands and concert party that I played with in the early 70s had been cobblers, tailors, carpenters, cash crop farmers, electricians, stewards, builders, and timber yard workers. Then early highlife recording stars like Kakeku had been a miner, Onyina a shoemaker, Kwaumensa a watchmaker, C.K. Mann a seaman, and E.K. Nyami a clerk. Whilst Kwame Asari, who made the very first highlife recordings in 1928, worked for the Tarkwa Trading Company in Kumasi. Picture, please, number 4, 3B. Okay, so Kwame Asari is the guitarist on the right. And there were 3 Fantis who were working in Kumasi for the Tarkwa Trading Company, and then they put their band together and called it the Kumasi Trio. I guess they should have called it the Fanti Trio, but they happened to be in Kumasi, so that's why they called it that. And they started recording in 1928. And as I mentioned, Kwaumensa was the nephew of Kwame Asari. It is because of their low or intermediate social status that the records of these pioneering highlife artists are able to provide historians with the unofficial views and commentaries of the man in the street. So even if these musicians may have been inarticulate in terms of writing books and articles, they were highly articulate in terms of the songs they made and left us, which, just like books and newspapers, also contain data useful to historians. So I'm now moving to sociology department. African popular music is usually trans-ethnic, and so is relevant to the urban African studies carried out by university sociology departments. In fact, I'm a product of the sociology department at Legon myself. In fact, this type of music has provided and still provides an artistic lingua franca for polyglot African city dwellers. For instance, sociologists talk of the process of urban pull, in which rural migrants from various ethnic areas are attracted to the urban centers through new job opportunities and the general lifestyle of the big city. In the mid-20th century, these new city ideas, norms, and fashions were often disseminated into rural areas via popular performance genres. For instance, through Ghanaian popular theater groups known as concert parties, that plays are accompanied by highlife music. Indeed, these itinerant concert parties began touring the rural and provincial areas of Ghana as early as the 1930s, long before the introduction of radio and television. Next photo 4, please. So this is one of the buses that the Jaguar Jokers travel from town to town, village to village. Next picture. And that's the type of theater. You see, these people were very, very clever. They don't need theaters. They don't need a national theater. Every single compound house in Ghana is a potential theater. And this is what they utilized. And these are pictures, you know, I took snapshots when I was traveling with them back in those days. During this era, that is the era of the concert parties, when there were many, by the way, there were probably around about between 200 and 300, about 200 to 250 concert parties and guitar bands operating in Ghana between the 50s and the 80s. A huge number of them. I think we're just down to a handful in Kumasi. During this era and right up until the 1980s, the themes of concert party plays and associated highlife songs not only dealt with the attraction of city life, that is the pull, urban pull, but also the problems that poor Ghanaians face from rapid Western-style modernization. For example, because of the large numbers of male job seekers then migrating from villages to cities, social problems arose, such as urban anomie, that is loneliness, alcoholism, and prostitution, because they left their families behind in the villages. And these themes are all reflected in the text of concert party plays and songs. Yet another modernization problem noted by sociologists was that Western norms that fostered patrilinealism, monogamy, and the nuclear family resulted in stresses and strains within the traditional Ghanaian extended family system. This too was reflected in concert party and high life texts that often dwelt on the themes of inheritance disputes, family witchcraft accusations and abusu ebone, broken homes, and the plight of the orphan child. The orphan was a new phenomenon in Ghana. There were no orphans before. It's a modern phenomenon, like street children. These are new developments of modern civilization. Orphan children, broken homes, orphan children. In short, the concert party high life musicals provided Ghanaians with a humorous running commentary on and a vernacular critique of the tensions stemming from rapid social change. Next photograph, please, number 6. Okay. This is a picture from the Jaguar Jokers, one of the many plays that, when I was traveling with them, they were doing, I think it's Awisia Yiwani. It's about an orphan boy who's being maltreated by his stepmother. And it's to do with broken homes and the state of orphanhood and so on. So they had these posters. They were very large. They used to sling them on the side of a truck and then go around the villages and attract a crowd. So it's a sort of there was a guy called Mark Anthony who used to do these in Swedru, these big photographs. So they're called cartoons. They call them cartoons. Okay, we're still on the sociology department. Now turning to youth subcultures. Another domain of sociology departments are studies of urban youth subcultures that are often linked to specific popular music styles and their associated dances, fashions, ideals, and cultural heroes. Since various forms of transcultural popular dance music, like high life, have been created by successive generations of young Africans since the early 1900s, popular music can be used to examine these youth movements. Here I will mention some found in Ghana, and an early one was Konkoma High Life, that so-called ruffians and school dropouts invented in the 1930s. I think there's a picture for this one. No, there isn't. Okay. Another was the dance and guitar band high life of the 1950s that was created by the likes of E.T. Mensah, Ike Nyami, and Kwa Mensah, who were then young and clamoring for independence. Indeed, high life music was the soundtrack of the early independence era. Then in the 1960s came rock and roll, or the rock and roll generation, and in Accra, area boys known as Tokyo Joes, who with their pompadour hairstyles patronized this rebellious dance music of Western youth. Photo 7, please. So these are the Tokyo Joes. They used to wear what we call drainpipe trousers. They're a little bit tight. There was a thing called winkle picket shoes with pointed ends. I think they come back into fashion. You know, everything goes around in circles. Fashions go this way, that way. Skirts go down, they go up. Shoes get pointed, they get blunt, and so on. And they had these hairstyles. You can't see it very well, but the front is sort of lifted up, and it's a copy of Elvis Presley and the pompadour look. Anyway, so they were one of the followers of early rock and roll dance clubs. We're talking about the 1960s, particularly amongst the Ga people. The Ga Tokyo Joes also patronized the newly emergent Palogo drum dance invented by Bukum youth in the early 1960s that was itself partly influenced by the twist dance of rock and roll. Indeed, Palogo was for a while banned by some Ga elders and Accra authorities as being indecent and rebellious, before Nkrumah intervened and gave this neo-traditional street music of the Ga youth the green light. So we nearly lost the Palogo in Ghana. We nearly lost it because some people didn't like it. They said it was too modern. But Nkrumah himself, of course, realized that I don't know what Nkrumah actually said when the Durbar was held of the 50. You see, again, human beings being contrary creatures, the more they beat the children, the more they played the Palogo. And I'm saying they beat them. Some people that I know were actually jailed and had their instruments confiscated and were caned by the police for playing Palogo drumming around about 1963-64. People have forgotten about this. But of course, the youth made them more diehard. So Nkrumah luckily intervened with Professor Apoku from the university as well. And they managed to get this thing sorted out. And I can imagine Nkrumah saying something like, well, if this music has been tainted by rock and roll and Chubby Checker and the twist, where did Chubby Checker and the twist get the twist from, if not from Africa? So he said it's basically African music. So he gave, this is imaginary, I don't know what conversation they had. Anyway, so luckily we still have the Palogo, it wasn't banned. Then in the 1970s, I'm sort of going chronologically, came the Afro and psychedelic fashions, or schoolboy soul brother pop competitions. There are hundreds of them going on in Ghana at that time. And the Afrocentric message of James Brown, say it loud, I'm black and proud. This helped trigger the homegrown Afro rock, Afro soul, Afro funk, and Afro beat, not Afro beats, but the Afro beat of the 70s, of recording stars like Osibisa, Hejole Sounds, Bumbaya, and the psychedelic Aliens, and Nigerian Sonny Okosun, Shagan Buckner, Orlando Julius, and Fela Kuti. Picture, please, number 8. There we are. I saw this record first being sold in Nigeria. I think it was actually recorded in Nigeria, but they're Ghanaian guys. I knew some of them. Malik Crime, I don't know if you remember him. Anyway, so they were putting sort of Jimi Hendrix guitar and mixing it up with a bit of Afro rock, Afro funk, Afro beat at that time. This was followed so I'm going quite fast on this. This is followed in the 80s with the disco-influenced burger high life of George Daku and Daddy Lumba, whose lyrics were mainly concerned with romantic love, i.e. Odo. So next picture, please. There we are. And it came, like so many of these styles, they come with a sort of uniform. So that was the uniform of the burger guys back in the 80s, braces and jelly curl hairs and so on. And sometimes bleaching their faces. I think they were copying Michael Jackson, but we much later found out that Michael Jackson wasn't trying to turn himself into a white man. He had yaws. He had that depigmentation of the skin disease. That's what happened. So it wasn't, people say Michael Jackson was trying to make himself look like a white person by bleaching himself, but it was because I think he wanted to sort of cover up the changes in his color tone due to that sickness. Anyway. But in Ghana, they didn't know. He was trying to whiten himself, so they decided to whiten themselves as well. Fortunately, I think yellow fever is what Fela called it. And in that song, everything was said about that problem. At the same time, that is more or less the same time of Burger High Life, came Afro Reggae of West African artists such as Alpha Blondy, Majek Fashek, Kojo Entry, and later Rocky Daouni, who were all influenced by the dreadlocks, Back to Africa message and Rastafarianism of Bob Marley. Let's have a photo. Oh, there it is. And by the way, both Kojo Entry and Alpha Blondy both recorded in my studio when they were young. I just thought I'd mention that. So this is the classic vibes or classic handles Kojo entry, that's how he started many, many years ago. At that time, their music was almost indistinguishable from that of West Indians. In fact, they used to go to, I think, Denmark and places like that, and let the people there think that they were from the West Indies. But in fact, later on, Kojo Entry and the others came to their senses and started to Ghanaianize the reggae rather than copying West Indians. It's a learning procedure. If you fall in love with somebody's music, you idolize them, you copy their music, but after a while, if you've got any sense, you come back having mastered their tricks. This is a normal process of learning. It's the same with having children. They will learn from you and then go in their own direction. During the 1990s, American hip-hop became the fashion with its hoods, ostentatious bling-bling jewelry, and yo-yo boy outfits. And in Ghana, it was and still is performed by local hip life youth who aggressively rap in vernacular languages about material fame and fortune. Next picture, please. I'm just showing the hoods. The hoods of hip-hop and hip life was the camouflage of the black youth in the ghettos of America so they couldn't be identified by the police. It's as simple as that fashion. So that one was copied in Ghana, but probably the Ghanaian youth didn't realize the meaning of it. You know, that it was a disguise. Next picture. I think this is Strongman. He's a Ghanaian hip lifer who also wears a hood, but probably doesn't realize the origin of the hood was a protection against police surveillance in America. Today it is Afro dancehall, Afro pop, and a West African form of electronic dance music called Afrobeats that dominates the youth subcultures of Ghana and Nigeria. But I will leave that for another musicologist to discuss on a future occasion. Now turning to political science. The study of popular music studies is also relevant to Ghanaian and African university political science departments. For instance, and as mentioned earlier, High Life artists supplied the soundtrack for the early independence era, as they came from the same or the very same intermediate class as did the Veranda Boys, who were the backbone of Nkrumah's mass political party, the Convention People's Party. Being a product of Akan's, Gars, and to a lesser extent Eve's, High Life music was also trans-ethnic, and so Nkrumah used it to project national rather than ethnic ideals. Consequently, the Nkrumah government formed High Life bands and concert parties within the workers, builders, and farmers' brigades and the state hotels, as well as setting up state recording studios and endorsing the establishment of two music unions affiliated to the Ghanaian Trade Union Congress. So we had two trade unions for musicians under Nkrumah, and when he went, the TUC went for temporarily, I think, and these unions went, and we had to reinvent Musica 15 years later or whatever. So Musica wasn't the first, that's what I'm trying to say. We had unions back in the 60s, but because they were identified being close to the CPP, they were disbanded. Nkrumah also took High Life bands as musical ambassadors with him on international tours. Moreover, and in line with his African personality policy, he also sent some High Life dance bands, like Uhuru, the Brigade Band, and George Lee's African Messengers, for intensive training at the Arts Council in traditional African music and dance. Next picture, please, Eric. And this is, oh, no, the one before that one. That's it. Xylophone. I think we have a xylophone player in the audience. He teaches xylophone at the music department. But, so this is Potato and Stan Plange wearing some East African hat, I think. And they were being trained in traditional African rhythms at the Arts Council, encouraged by Kwame Nkrumah. I can go into this, very interesting, the whole link between this and Osibisa, the band, because Potato was a member of that. and so was Mactonto, who was a member of Uhuru. So in a sense, some of the seeds that Nkrumah sowed then came after he was deposed. So I think the idea of integrating traditional African drumming into a dance band in Ghana happened at that time, 1963, and it later bore fruit with bands like Osibisa and so on. Next, no, wait a minute, just a second. Okay, some high life songs of the 1950s and 60s projected the socialist and Pan-African ideals of Nkrumah. Not the national, but rather the socialistic and Pan-African ideals. And a famous example of this is the Tempo's 1961 high life called Ghana, Guinea, Mali, that lauded the attempted socialist union of these three West African countries. So if we could have that picture. I don't know, can you get the music on for this one? Number 2.
Guinea-Mali Union has laid down a strong foundation for redemption of Africa, for which we've been strongly fighting. Ghana, Guinea, Mali, the nucleus of the great union. Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Africa's strongest foundation. Ghana, Guinea, Mali, the nucleus of the great union. Ghana, Guinea, Mali, has now once been laid forever. First it was Ghana.
Another example is Onyina's Destiny of Africa, that celebrated in 1958 the formation in Accra of the precursor of the African Union. If we could have the picture, next picture, of Onyina from Kumasi, and the music. Destiny of Africa.
The 15th and 23rd of the book in 1958, a conference was held in Accra by 8 members of the truly liberated self-governing nations in Africa. It stands for Egypt and Ethiopia. T truly stands for Tunisia. L in liberated for Libya and Liberia. M in members stands for Morocco. S itself stands for Sudan.
Yet another song, this time by Ike Nyami. And this was a song, there was a great outpouring of grief in Ghana when Lumumba was assassinated in 1961 in the Congo, because he'd actually come here in 1958 to help in the formation of what became the African Union. And this particular song is called Monche Nywe. I believe it has some words in it which are quite insulting to the people who killed Lumumba. After you kill him, what are you going to do with his body? Eat it? You know, it was a big insult. There were many songs that in honor of Lumumba, in fact. Bob Cole had one, and I think Onyina even had one. Anyway, this is Ike's Nyami's version with his falsetto singer singing in a high-pitched voice. So if we could have the song 4. It sounds like a happy song, but it's a sad story. So there goes the theory of minor and major scales. I hate to cut off somebody doing a beautiful guitar solo. In more recent years, African popular music text has provided a platform for socio-political protests against various post-independence governments. So we're moving from anti-colonial to what would you say, African governments who've become corrupt or whatever. And a very famous example, of course, is Fela Kuti's 1976 Nigerian Afrobeat song, Zombie, that supported, in fact, in his songs, I think he wrote about 200 songs. I've often thought Mao Zedong had his red book. The Europeans had the Communist Manifesto of Karl Marx. Gaddafi had his green book. These are all sort of radical statements of the leaders. Well, Nigeria had Fela. His songs were warning the Nigerians years ago about the problems that are going to come down on him, on the country. Anyway, so he was always in support of the downtrodden masses. He himself came from an elite family. This is a sort of contradiction in his character, or that he was identified with what he called the sufferheads, the suffering workers, and so on. And he lambasted Nigerian military regimes. In fact, by this time, if we could have the next picture, I'm not going to play Zombie because everybody knows it. Okay, well, at least let's see the picture of Zombie. Okay, well, no problem. When he released that song, by the way, he had already set up the Young African Pioneers and was forming their own newspaper. And then later on, he formed his own political party, the Movement of the People, and actually stood for president, or tried to stand for president of Nigeria. What would have happened, I do not know. But it probably wouldn't have been so bad, my own belief. But one can never say. I mean, Youssou N'Dour did become Minister of Culture in, was it Senegal? And by the way, Victor Owaifu became Minister of Culture in Edo State. When in Ghana are we going to have a Minister of Culture who's a musician? Or at least a performing artist? Anyway, that's another matter. So next picture. So Fela actually made a film called The Black President, as you know, and it was burnt by the army at the last moment. And that's him and me and J.K. Brymer. They pulled me in as a white man with a solar topi and the whole works. And I got stuck there for 1 month. I went there for 4 days. I was teaching at GIS, chemistry and physics. That's another side of my skill set or whatever. I told the headmistress that I was just going for 4 days to do some shots in Nigeria. My passport was seized by the IGP because of my relationship with Fela. I was stuck there for a month. The rumor went round that I died. But it wasn't so. But the film was burnt. And there was a whole bunch of Ghanaians there, Ghanaian film crew. And we got out about 2 or 3 weeks before the place was burnt by the army. And the film went up in smoke. But I just heard, literally 2 days ago, that an enterprising Italian guy has saved 8 reels of it, of rushes. And he's dead now, but his wife has asked me to get in contact with him. So maybe we'll still see bits of the film appear. It didn't all disappear. Some of it was saved by certain people, including this Italian man. Anyway, I'm going off the topic a bit. I'm now turning from Nigeria to Ghana. More recent political critiques come from Ghanaian high life artists against various Ghanaian regimes. But these are usually in a disguised or indirect form. It's a big difference between Fela and Ghanaian. Maybe Nigerians just get to the point straight, and Ghanaians are more polite. Whatever it is, it's often in proverbial and metaphorical way that musicians will condemn politicians here. They won't be as brutal as Fela was. And a very good example is African Brothers, a 1967 high life song, Abitie, sums it well. That, like George Orwell's famous book Animal Farm, puts the emergence of a nouveau riche, in this case in post-independence Ghana, into the form of an animal parable. And I even talked to Nana at one point, and I said, did you make this as a political statement? He said, oh no, my father told me the story. It's a Nancy story. But he was a very trickish guy himself, and also maybe he didn't want to be seen as too political. I don't know. Coming up into the hip life era, by the way, hip-hop itself is a shortening of the word hip-hop high life. So hip life, it had a sort of the high life sort of embedded inside the hip life. And as time has passed by, hip-hop or hip life has become more Ghanaian. It's not only sung in Ghanaian languages, but they use jammer beats. There's even a type of hip life called jammer hip life. Anyway, a very early example of a political critique in hip life form is the native funk lords, Vote for Me, Make I Chop President. It's quite a good song for the up-and-coming elections too, I think. A satirical political song released during the 2000 elections. So if we could just hear that song, 5, sung in pidgin English.
Vote for me, make a chop president. Vote for me, I want chop president. Vote for me, make a chop president. I will make you vice president. Vice president. Vote for me, make a chop president. Vote for me, I want chop president. Vote for me, make a chop president. I will make you vice president. Vice president. If I come power, everything go be alright. Then you see what they talk, you know be say lie. This one I know fit keep confidential. Several times you suffer, no rescuer. KK price to calm down, no more suffer. Vision 88/4, better plan. Gumption, different sense inside one man. No more promise and fail, no delay. I fit session you self, you go bow. Santo professor, no more killer disease. Mosquitoes for the yard, all go free. Kofi Annan self see me yesterday for advice because he said my advice be nice.
Okay, next picture. I'll just give you one more example of a political hip life. In 2008, Barima Sydney brought out his Africa Money CD that contains the refrain, I should say, Ogo de chop, poor man de work. And also another refrain, monkey de work, baboon de chop. And this was actually used as one of the TUC slogans at one point, the trade union. Monkey de work, baboon is the poor man, monkey is the rich man. Animal Farm again, and so on. Now let's turn to African studies, Black and African studies departments. Moved from politics to so this is Sydney. Black American popular music performance contains African ingredients. I won't go into the history of this, but it's to do with the slave trade and the development of new forms of popular music in the Black Americas. From jazz to samba, you know, Afro-Cuban music, the works. Whilst high life and other forms of African popular music have assimilated Black American music. Consequently, African popular music studies are pertinent to African and Black studies departments as they throw light on the long-term transatlantic cultural dialogue between Africa and the Black Americas. This is what this diagram is meant to represent. The top part is the movement of Africans to the Americas, and then the bottom part is the return journey, music coming back. And the interesting thing about this is that the first Black American music to hit Africa came here. It came actually to Freetown 223 years ago. It wasn't Bob Marley, it wasn't Louis Armstrong coming to Ghana in 1956 and 1960. It goes all that way back in time. And it's because of this that I mentioned Professor Atta Anand Mensah, one of the pioneers of high life studies in Ghana when I was young, and also a friend of my father's. And he calls this a musical homecoming. So you can imagine music leaves and comes back home, even if it took 300 years. And I give it the name Black Transatlantic Cultural Feedback. So, and other peoples have noticed this phenomenon, and of course it's going on right now. But if you talk to the dancehall musicians, they'll think they're the guys who discovered Jamaican music. Well, the Jamaicans were here 223 years ago, bringing music with them, as I'll explain. In fact, this is what it is. The very first documented case of such a musical homecoming or feedback to Africa from the Americas occurred in 1800 when the British settled freed maroon slaves from Jamaica in Freetown, Sierra Leone. These maroons brought with them their gumbe drum, which subsequently spread to 14 other West African countries, including Ghana, where it became known as gome. We have a gome player sitting in the audience. It's a Pan-African drum, or Pan-West African drum. So this is a picture of the gumbe drum as played in Jamaica. They don't sit on it like in Ghana. It was a sort of disguised drum. It was one of the permissible drums that the slave masters would allow slaves to use because you can't use it as a talking drum. And the whites were petrified of pegged talking drums ever since the Haitian Revolution. Haiti was able to conquer and throw out the French partly because of voodoo drums as a sort of bush telegraph system and communication system amongst the slaves. I won't go into the story of Haiti, but it made the white slave masters panic. And that's why they banned the drums, the peg drums, the African peg drums. But the Jamaicans were very smart. They created drums that looked safe. They didn't look like peg drums, but they kept some of the African features in the music, syncopations and so on. I won't go into the whole story of how it got into Ghana from Freetown, but it was partly through working in the Congo or in Fernando Po. There were connections between Sierra Leone workers and Ghanaian workers, particularly from Accra, Ghaz. Okay. So let me show you some photos. So this is a typical Ga cultural group. This group was called Agbafoy. There were many. Wulome was the pioneer of this. And you can see that the gome drum had been fully indigenized into Ga culture. And many Gas would tell you, I only found this out because I was inquisitive and talked to very elderly Ga people in the early 70s. And the Ga drum actually came from Sierra Leone people they met in the Congo. But it has a very interesting Pan-African drum, and it's got everywhere. And another picture of the gome drum, and you can see me, next photo, and then you see me as I was in Jamestown. I was living in Jamestown at the time. This is from the Seaview Hotel, which has now been pulled down, unfortunately. Accra's first nightclub and hotel has been pulled down, no longer standing. And you can see the gome drum sitting. It acts as a sort of bass drum. But that is the first musical connection, not drums going from Africa to America, but drums coming from America back to Africa in modified form. It's the same story with the conga drums, for instance, the Afro-Cuban congas. Anyway, By the way, what is very interesting about this whole, if you look at that original diagram, the circular diagram, and if you take into consideration that the first musical connection, let me make a slight divert. I wasn't going to say this, but let me say it because I have an interesting audience. There's a thing called the gate of no return. Maybe we could go back a few pictures, just a few pictures to the diagram of the two sides. That's it. Now, the white slave masters, the people buying slaves, for them, it was the gate of no return. And for most of the unfortunate people who were sent, it was the gate of no return. But in fact, there was a return. It came in through freed slaves, black soldiers, and hundreds of years ago, I'm talking about, this division between this side of the Atlantic and the American side was meant to be the one-way gate. Well, the whites failed. Actually, they failed. They didn't divide, if I can put it, the black race into two portions, from Africa and from the Americas. They failed because there was a trickle back all the time. And they were being carried by sailors. I won't go into this too much detail, but it's a sort of miracle that this happened. And it happened first, has been documented in music. Because this is the point I was trying to make. That this, in fact, I was talking to some of my American students recently, and I said they should change this door of no return to the door of return, but now it's the door of no return. Now it's the door of return, because African Americans and Caribbeans are coming back home. And they said they've already done that. I said, thank God for that. Then I said they should add one other sentence afterwards, or phrase. The gate of no return, but some have returned. And this some have returned has been going on for 223 years. That's what I was suggesting. So the return has been happening. And so our dance, I don't know if there are any dance musicians here. Jamaica, no? Okay, dance fans? Jamaican Afro dance hall? If they are, the first Jamaicans' music to come to Africa came 223 years ago. But the thing is, what's interesting, is this predates the political reconnection. We know about Nkrumah and the great leaders maybe having studies in Garveyism and the impact of people like Blyden, Césaire, Garvey, Padmore, Du Bois. But that political reconnection was later than the musical connection. The musical connection was the first. So, because music tends to anticipate other social processes. But this is all speculative. You might not agree with me, but let me go to another very early homecoming or feedback. That was the earliest I gave you, to push the time parameter back 2.5 centuries. So another homecoming occurred during the 1873-1901 Ashanti Wars, during which around about 6,000 English-speaking black Caribbean soldiers were stationed at Elmina and Cape Coast. In their spare time, these West Indian colonial troops used their regimental brass bands to introduce Afro-Caribbean and calypso music to coastal Ghanaians. This bridged the gap between Western and African music, and as such, helped catalyze the emergence of the first form of proto-highlife in the 1880s and 90s called Adaha music, that is still played today by brass bands in Fantiland. So and I got this information from Lieutenant Colonel Festus Abwaji, who wrote a book on the Ghanaian army, and he's got all sorts of interesting facts and figures in there. 6,000 West Indian soldiers were stationed in Fanti, not all at the same time in batches. They're bound to have a profound influence. And they did, because the Ghanaian brass band musicians started to imitate some of the calypso songs, like All For You. Everybody knows All For You. You know Everybody Likes Saturday Night. These were calypso songs that were picked up by the Ghanaians. But of course, once you've copied the West Indians and you've started to be influenced by their music, you can then, that's halfway. You're halfway home. You take the further step and you invent Adaha music, where you start to use local rhythms. And that leads into high life music. The next photo, please. Okay, this is a picture of West Indian soldiers at Cape Coast Castle. They were usually brought in groups of 200 or 300 at a time. I don't mean there were 6,000 at one single moment of time. During the 30-year period, they were stationed there and helped in the Ashanti Wars. I believe a Rastafarian delegation once went up to the Asantehene to apologize for the role of their ancestors in helping defeat Ashanti on behalf of the British. I don't know much about this story, but it could ring true. So this is from 1890, this picture. Next picture, please. And this is a Ghanaian local brass band that was developing what was really the earliest form of high life. The word high life wasn't invented until the 1920s, but we had forms of music similar to high life, or precursors, Adaha and Sibi Saba, which I'll mention in a moment. But the critical catalyst in this was the West Indians. Now I'm moving to gender studies, or departments like Sigensa. My final point on the importance of African popular music studies to the university is that these studies are useful when examining changing attitudes to women in Ghanaian society. For although women played a significant role in traditional African music making, they found great difficulty at first in entering into popular music. An early example of this problem goes back to 1918 and is the case of Yam Ponsa, who was the sister of one of the Fanti musicians who comprised the Kumasi trio. We saw the picture earlier of Kwame Asari. So one of the guy's sisters was Yam Ponsa, very beautiful woman and a good dancer. Initially, the dance that accompanied early high life had been the Osibi Saba, or Sibi Saba, a typical African ring dance in which men and women do not touch each other. However, Yam Ponsa introduced to high life the latest urban craze of couples dancing European-type ballroom steps. To do this, she naturally had to physically hold the men she was teaching to dance the ballroom, but dancing it to high life, as well as receive coins from them for her efforts. Because they were playing around Chibi and places like this during the cocoa season. So the farmers and so on had money in their pockets, and they wanted to learn the latest dance fashion from Abirichiri. But the problem with this is, at the time, because of her dancing, what would it be, bone to flesh, hugging, which is basically the European tradition, couples dancing, you're actually holding the woman, which was never done traditionally in African dance, and taking coins from the men, she was incorrectly called a loose woman. She was not. She was just very brave or bold. She was a daredevil. However, things began to change in the 1950s with the Tempos dance band, which was which was influenced by the swing music of American jazz bands that sometimes backed African-American superstar singers like Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan. As a result, E.T. Mensah decided to recruit some female superstars, or at least stars, into his Tempos band, such as Julie Okine and Agnes Aite. So in fact, Julie Okine is the most famous of these because she actually composed high lifes and recorded them. So I think Eric will play you this song called Nothing But a Man's Slave that she wrote in 1957 and recorded.
I went downtown one Saturday night just for a bottle of beer. I met a lovely Cape Coast boy, looking so nice and sweet. He wants to know my name, he wishes to know my girl. If I died of a man's love, I'm nothing but a man's slave. stepped into a taxi cab, heading straight to me. We went into a busy nightclub, and he asked for a table for two. He wants to know my name. He wishes to know my way. If I died of a man's love, I'm nothing but a man's slave.
Thank you. More women entered popular performance during the late 50s and early 60s due to the important role women played in the independence struggle. Consequently, when establishing state highlight bands and concert parties, Nkrumah and the CPP encouraged women to join these groups. Some of those who took this route into professional acting and singing were Adelaide Boabeng, Margaret Kwenu, and Essie Com. This is a picture of Essie Com. She was a member of the brigade band and the workers' brigade, so they wore sort of quasi-military uniform. So Nkrumah's own policy helped to some degree in the feminization of Ghanaian popular music. And then in the 70s and 80s, this feminization speeded up or increased dramatically with the rise of local church gospel dance music, as it was not frowned on for a woman to sing in church bands. Indeed, today, it is women who dominate as the vocalists of Ghanaian gospel music. When I was first playing bands in Ghana, there were about 10 professional women performers in the whole country. Now there are probably 10,000. So it's definitely a move in the right direction. Picture, please. This is just a collage of different gospel groups from about 15 years ago. And you can see just women are jumping out of the pictures. There are, of course, men gospel singers, but the women are really critical for this. And then, moreover, it is from church-trained singers that we have many of our current Afro-pop divas, such as Efia, Becca, and Wiala. If we could have, yes. So we have a whole batch now of trained women who have been trained in the churches as singers and have come now into secular music, and they call it tree pop or Afro pop. Let's just hear one of them. Let's hear a song by Becca called Africa Woman. But Eric, can you play 25 seconds into the song? Because there's a very long-winded introduction. If it's possible to go about 25 seconds into the song. It's song number 7. So they're singing from the point of view of a woman. I was even going to play a song by Wiala, but I thought I wouldn't, because I've got some young audience here, and the lyrics are pretty strong. So this feminized area of gospel music, that we're talking about the current situation, and secular Afro-pop, and of course Nigeria is the same. Tiwa Savage has the equivalent to Wiala and so on, stands in contrast to hip life that is dominated by male artists who often rap from a macho or misogynist point of view. And a good example is Sydney's 2003 Abushkaleki, that condemned, back in those days, women for bearing their midriffs. This sort of fashion that was introduced from America, where a woman must show all her stomach and so on. So the musicians were making funny comments about this. And another one is Tic Tacs, Philomena, which ridicules young women for following the imported fashion of women growing their body hair. Hair everywhere. And get a grader and, I mean, it was a ridiculous song. And there was no hip life or equivalent woman who sang a hip life to tell Tic Tac to get lost and mind his own business. It's very strange. There was no female voice at that time coming out and putting the woman's point of view. And at this point, I think we have a picture of Tic Tac. He was actually on the executive of the Musicians Union a few years ago. So I think he's cooled down now anyway. Here I must mention that the University of Ghana's Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy, or CGENSA, we have somebody right in front of me who used to be head of it. I'm not sure, are you still head, or? No, it's a long time ago, okay. Anyway, the CGENSA used Ghanaian popular music recordings as a source of data for its 2008 Changing Representations of Women in Popular Music project. In fact, I helped supply around about 100 Ghanaian popular songs from the 1930s to the present that sort of contain positive and negative depictions of women. So you can actually, it's like what I was saying about the history of the inarticulate. You can go into music to find out what people were thinking at different times in history about different topics, including the status of women. And I had many of these records because I've been running the African Popular Music Archives, BAPMAF, since 1990. And this is my very last picture. That's, well, myself, my son, who's unfortunately not here today because he's got malaria, and Nana and Kofi, who are also sitting somewhere in front of me. There they are. They were also the publishers of High Life Time 3. Anyway, from all I've said, I hope this audience will appreciate that African and Ghanaian popular music is far from being irrelevant to academia. For studies of it not only contributes to university departments that focus on the performing arts, but also to those concerned with African and Black studies, history, political science, sociology, and gender matters. Thank you very much.
We have been listening to Professor John Collins speaking on contribution of African popular music to universities. He gave us an evolution of African popular music, looked at the pioneers, Jerry Hansen, E.T. Mensah, C.K. Man Kakeku, E.K. Nyami, and the others. But he also gave us an indication about the variance of African popular music. The high life, Palongo. Then he referred to the concert party, etc., etc., and then the Afrobeat. But one of the things which I recognize from all that he said is the role of the guitar in African popular music. It has been very pronounced. So based on this, I have three things that I would like us to look at. The first one is the transdisciplinary nature of African popular music. It cuts across various disciplines. And I believe Emeritus Professor Diamond is here. It will have cut through chemistry, his area. So that's very important. Political science, sociology, history, African studies, name them. Very transdisciplinary. The second point, which I would like to flag is the mobilizing and unifying role of African popular music. He referred to the decolonization period, the Veranda Boys, and I think that mobilizing, unifying role of African popular music has led to what we now know as Jama, which is a way of bringing people together to sing, to actually network, and then of course to do other things. They may be mobilizing, political, etc. So very important, and I think there is that link between African popular music and Jama music. The third issue which I want to look at is, the challenge of Africanizing our disciplines. He made a very important point right at the beginning that, well, nobody thought anything about African popular music. People didn't want it. People did not even understand it. But I think the challenge towards this evening is that with perseverance, with dedication and the commitment, we can all try to Africanize our disciplines. Are we going to write textbooks? What are we going to do to ensure that in spite of the resistance to the Africanization of our disciplines, we should at least make sure that we resist those type of things. My final point is about African popular music changing our behaviors and our attitudes. And if you listen to some of the lyrics, the songs which were played, you will see the role that African popular music can play in changing our behaviors and our attitudes. So, Professor John Collins, we would like to thank you so much for bringing back history. I learned a lot of these things in the past because my discipline is political science, and therefore we learn things about the Veranda Boys, Nkrumah's mobilizing spirit and force. And I think you were able to bring back those memories to us. On that note, I would like to thank you once again for this illuminating lecture. Thanks a lot. And to all of you, thanks very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Professor Ayi, for your remarks. Indeed, music is a universal language and culture. And I don't think there's any one of us here who was not touched in some way by what Professor Collins presented. I, for one, forgot that I was in a lecture and just wanted to listen to the music. So thank you very much. We have an upcoming event that I'd like to announce and to invite you to. And this is the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences Public Forum, which is held in June every year. This year's Public Forum is on the theme, the impact of modern technology and artificial intelligence on education delivery. The forum will be held from 5th to 7th June, I beg your pardon, 5th to 7th June 2023, and it will be here at the auditorium. We look forward to having you here for this exciting event. Now let me acknowledge our sponsors for this event. And I'd like to mention Ashesi University, who supported us for the event. Shall we give them a hand? And then also from Ashesi University, we have Dr. Joseph Odro Frimpong, Senior Lecturer, Humanities and Social Sciences, and Mr. Richard Ekuma, Project Officer, Academic Affairs, Ashesi University. Shall we give them a hand? Thank you. Music, before we started, you heard some music being played here and filling up the auditorium. And that was performed by Dr. Eric Sunu and the Palm Wine Group of the Department of Music at the University of Ghana, where Dr. Collings. Thank you very much. Let me also acknowledge the schools here today. And they are Accra Academy Senior High School, and we have Accra Wesley Girls Senior High School. What's your slogan? Awaken. Awege. 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 Thank you very much. When we leave, there will be light refreshment served right outside. So please don't forget to refresh yourself before you leave. Thank you. Now please stand while the chair and the speaker leave the room. Thank you.
Philomena, what did you mean? Well, I feel some I can't call for people. Come back to
Second